Google Pixel 7 costs $599 for the cheapest model, while the iPhone 14 Pro costs almost double at $1,099.
No.
The big question is though, is that worth it? From a camera perspective, is the iPhone 14 Pro that much better than the Pixel 7? Let's find out. We have 10 camera categories, and we're going to put these phones head to head to find out which camera comes out on top. If you're new around here, my name's Tom. I'm a full-time photographer and videographer. YouTube's actually told me that only a small percentage of the people watching this are subscribed, so if you can go ahead and fix that, that'd be awesome. Okay, so obviously a massive difference between these two phones and a lot of what you're paying for when you actually go for the iPhone 14 Pro is obviously the additional lens on the back of the camera system. The iPhone 14 to the Pixel 7 would obviously be the direct comparison. This phone actually has an additional sensor size increase over the iPhone 14 and also an additional telephoto lens. So we're not going to be comparing the telephoto lens throughout the course of the comparison, but I do think it's super interesting to compare the iPhone 14 Pro and just see actually just how well the Pixel 7 does when you compare it to the more expensive model iPhone. Kicking off, let's talk about the front-facing cameras. So I'm going to jump back and forward here in terms of the shots. I'm going to jump between the two cameras, and this particular shot, relatively tricky, like intentionally tricky. I shot into the sun. There's a lot of shadow on me. There's a lot of highlight in the sky behind me, and then obviously you're just kind of moving around, getting a slightly different angle, different views. I think there is a substantial difference here in terms of quality, just particularly mainly in video. We'll talk about photos in a second. I think most notably is the skin, and you can see on my face the Pixel is definitely more kind of muddy, like there's not as much detail in my skin here. Okay, so here's another front-facing video. This one is the Pixel 7, so you can sort of get an idea of the stabilization, and here in a very, very snowy UK, which is very, very rare. Doesn't happen very often. Now let's switch to the iPhone. So here's the iPhone, so you can kind of get an idea of the difference. See just how much this snow is falling. It's pretty mad here at the moment. But yeah, interested to see what you guys think in terms of the difference in the footage. I think there's a couple of interesting takeaways here. I think the iPhone on the left, again, you can see the detail difference. There's much more detail on the shot on the left, particularly in my skin here. You can see it almost looks like I've got like a blur on my face on the Pixel shot. Obviously, there's a color difference as well. I actually prefer the Pixel colors in this particular instance. And it's also interesting, the stabilization seemingly not as good on the iPhone here. There's kind of quite a lot of relatively ugly shake. Just before we look at photos where it might be a different story, I do think overwhelmingly the best video performer for the front-facing camera is definitely the iPhone here on the left. And here we do have photos, and I kind of on surface here, I wonder if you can tell the difference between the left and the right-hand shot here. I'm actually going to zoom in as well, because I definitely think the performance is far better from the Pixel here. With this particular shot, the Pixel shot is the left-hand image, and the right-hand image is the iPhone. I actually think the Pixel looks better in this one. Here's another comparison. The Pixel image is actually on the right-hand side this time, the iPhone on the left, and again I actually think the Pixel image is better, even though there's an exposure difference. It would have been nicer if the Pixel was rendered slightly brighter, but more detail seemingly in the Pixel image, and the same goes here in this low light shot as well. I actually think the Pixel on the right hand side is done really, really well. Far less noise, far less visible noise, and the skin or my face in general looks better. So I think for stills, the Pixel 7 has performed really, really well. So this one was pretty close. I was pretty impressed with the Pixel 7 in this category, definitely from a photo perspective. So this one will be a draw. Next up, the big one, the main rear-facing camera on the back of both of these phones. Interesting fact, this is the first time we've actually ever seen an iPhone with a 50 megapixel camera. It's actually a 48 megapixel shooter, but the Pixel line has actually had this camera in place since last generation. The Pixel 6 was a 50 megapixel sensor. Super interesting to see Apple bump the megapixels here. So I'll show you a bunch of image comparisons, one after the other. Everything will be labeled for this particular one. So obviously iPhone 14 Pro, then Pixel 7, and then what we're going to do is I'll show you side by side, and the iPhone will be on the left and the Pixel will be on the right, so you can kind of immediately get a sense of the images. For instance, in this one, the obvious thing is the color cast, the color or the difference in color in these two photos. This is an interesting one, rear-facing camera selfies. So obviously you're going to see dramatically improved quality compared to the front-facing camera, but I actually think this one's really close. I think I prefer the colors on the Pixel for this one. I think they're a little bit more natural, not quite as enhanced as you can see. Both phones are a little bit overshot, but on the whole, these are great great shots. Here's a couple more side-by-sides. I think overwhelmingly these are really close, which I think is good for the Pixel, because obviously there's a lot of sort of hype went into on the iPhone 14 Pro about just how good that rear-facing camera is, and the Pixel does stand up really, really well. I think overall there's a couple of characteristics that are quite interesting. I'm just going to show you sort of side-by-sides now, just pop through a few in a row. But what's quite interesting is in terms of sharpness, I think things in terms of sharpness and detail look relatively similar. I do think the iPhone colors look a bit more natural in terms of the actual hues of them. The Pixel does have a habit of hewing towards blue, but at the same time, I do think the Pixel is a little bit less saturated. So sometimes when those colors don't come through, I end up preferring the Pixel image. One time where I don't prefer it is when things like skies are shot, because the Pixel does just have a habit of really making those super, super blue. So this one was surprisingly close, to be honest, as you've seen from those comparisons, which I think, given the price difference, is a massive sort of win for the Pixel 7. I think if I was being kind of like nitpicky here, I do prefer the iPhone images over the Pixel images. I think the colors are a little bit closer to truer life. Both cameras suffer a lot in terms of over sharpening. I cannot wait for a camera manufacturer to kind of drop this over sharpening thing that it does on all of their shots, because both of these cameras are kind of hampered by it. I think for this category, the point is going to have to go to the iPhone 14 Pro, with the caveat that the Pixel 7 wide camera is really not an underperformer. I think it does really, really well here, just not quite as good as the iPhone. Let's move on to the ultra-wide camera. So I think the biggest difference here, and it's a relatively substantial one, is that the ultra-wide system on the iPhone 14 Pro is actually substantially wider than the Google Pixel 7. The iPhone's ultra-wide is roughly 13mm, where the Pixel 7 is roughly about 16mm, and that's a fairly substantial difference. You can see in a few of the shots here, you can see just how much more you get in shot simply by using the iPhone over the Google Pixel 7. In my opinion, that is definitely preferable on the iPhone. Obviously, with an ultra-wide, you want it to be as wide as possible. Here's a few quick-fire comparisons on the ultra-wides. You can immediately see the difference in focal ranges, I think, on all of these shots. I think overwhelmingly, to be honest, in terms of quality, I don't think there's an enormous big deal in terms of difference. I think they both hold up really, really well in terms of detail and colors. I actually prefer the Pixel colors slightly, seemingly, on the ultra-wide. Definitely the biggest difference is the additional focal range. So no surprises on this one when it goes to the iPhone 14 Pro, mainly due to that additional field of view that you get with the 13mm ultra-wide. Next up is dynamic range, and this is an interesting one. One massive advantage of the Pixel 7's interface is you actually get a shadow controller. This allows you to manually adjust how much shadow information you want in each and every single shot. Obviously, Google is doing a whole bunch of software bits here, but I do love that you can simply change how much shadow data you want in your image, and I think that is super smart. Obviously, the dynamic range of these cameras is mainly dictated by software versus hardware, so each of these cameras has a different way of dealing with it, and I kind of think, to be honest, this is a bit of a moot point, really. Both cameras do very, very well. I think often this comes down to, on a shot-by-shot basis, which one you prefer. Sometimes you might end up with better dynamic range on the Pixel, or sometimes you might on the iPhone. I'm actually going to give this point to the Google Pixel 7 here. Even though I think you get slightly more dynamic range in the iPhone 14 Pro shots, I think it's a really, really cool feature that allows you to sort of manually adjust how much shadow data you want in each and every photograph. I think in general, these photos have a habit of looking kind of a bit fake by having artificially enhanced shadows, and the Pixel is the only phone that actually gives you the control to be able to change that. So in Lightroom, we're going to compare a couple of RAWs from these cameras. I'm going to obviously be giving this a very, very quick pass, but the main thing that I'm interested to test out is just how much data we get within these shots. So I've got a main rear camera shot here from the Pixel, and I just want to immediately test how much actual latitude we get. So you can see the before and after. That's how much shadow data we've got in the image. Let's bump this right down and then maybe give this a slightly different white balance look. I'm going to immediately just soften up the image as well. Something I do on all of my smartphone images. And then, so there we go. That's a very, very quick pass on that image. I'm not going to do it on every single one, but we will just compare the amount of latitude. Next photo, just out of interest to see kind of how much latitude we get. The thing I'm testing on this one is how much info we get on those lights. You can see these lights over here, and it's a decent amount. I'm actually pretty impressed with the RAWs from the Pixel. You are getting quite a lot of editing latitude there. Okay, same shots on the iPhone. Let's play around with that white balance as we did before. I think you get it looks like you get a little bit more editing latitude on the shadow side on the iPhone. Let's bring that down. You can see there's the before and after. Let's do the same thing. I'm going to soften up that image here. And we will also put a little bit of a tonal curve adjustment on there. And again, this is a very, very quick pass, but we will just do the same thing. I just want to test how much of that available light, I'm going to reset this, how much available light is in those images there. Bring that right down. You can see that we're getting, again, it's a similar amount of data within that frame. I think both of these cameras, for the standard RAW files from their cameras, are definitely looking strong. I think when comparing like for like, the amount of detail that you get within these RAW photos is relatively comparable. However, to tip the scales in the iPhone's favor, that was editing photos taken like for like from the 12 megapixel file RAWs. And on the iPhone, you actually have the option to shoot in full 48 megapixel RAWs, which do give you a bunch more latitude, with the caveat that they are kind of enormous. They're about 80 megabytes each, which is obviously not super sustainable in terms of shooting lots and lots of photos purely on your phone, but it does give you the option, and on the Pixel there is no such option there. Moving on to video now, this is a kind of standard footage, 4K, 25 frames a second, because I'm here in the UK, so this is the Pixel 7. I'm switching between the main rear-facing camera and the ultra-wide camera, and I think really this is the biggest category where the iPhone does definitely pull away. I think if you have a look at this shot here, this is the iPhone shot, exactly the same time. You can see how much more light the iPhone is actually sort of making it look like there is, even if it is artificial. I'll show these shots side by side. I couldn't get these to match exactly because obviously the shot isn't exactly the same, but the iPhone's on the left and the Pixel is on the right. You can definitely tell like there's definitely more noise in the shot. It's not as clean. The footage is just generally more muddy as well. The detail's not as crisp, not as sharp. iPhone video really is pretty spectacular. Video remains pretty strongly in favor of the iPhone 14 Pro. The same was true really of the last generation of phones. The video performance was kind of a bit lackluster on the Google Pixel 6. The good news is that Google is getting closer and closer. The Pixel 7 video is definitely enhanced over the Pixel 6 in my opinion, but obviously the iPhone has got better as well, and I just don't think this one is quite as close as the photos. 5.2 to the iPhone. A really fun feature, and one that genuinely does add a lot to the camera functionality for the Google Pixel 7, is the inclusion of motion modes. You get two motion modes. You get long exposure and action pan. Now, Apple does have a comparable long exposure feature. You shoot a live photo and then you can change it to long exposure. But in my opinion, and through kind of just various testing, it seems like the Google Pixel 7 long exposure is a bit more robust. And like I said, that action pan mode is a lot of fun. So this is definitely a point to the Pixel. Okay, moving on to low light. Okay, we'll kick off with some low light video here. This is the Pixel 7. Just as an aside, low light video on phones is absolutely mad. Like, if you were to get a normal camera out in the amount of light I had in this situation, it'd be pretty hard to film without like massively cranking the ISO. The software in these phones nowadays is just mad. This is making it look a lot brighter than it actually was. I think the Pixel 7 really stood up pretty well here, and then I reviewed the iPhone footage, and I think the iPhone footage is really actually pretty exceptional. Like, it looks really, really beautiful, from the stabilization to the color rendition and the sharpness and the detail. You can see this side by side. The iPhone is on the right here. I actually think the Pixel has done fairly well. Like I said, I think it looks really good, and actually it looks a bit better, I think, than the slightly better lit shot. I think it's a little bit less muddy, but I think really this one is about how good the iPhone footage is, instead of saying that the Pixel is performing badly. So look, in terms of photos, both of these cameras I think are actually pretty exceptional. I think the Pixel 7's as a real strength is its low light camera performance. I think the biggest difference here for me, because both of these phones do really, really well, you know, there's not a ton of noise visible or anything like that. I think the Pixel actually does a better job making the shot look more natural, whilst the iPhone has a habit of like over brightening these nighttime situations. Okay, so that's a point for low light video to the iPhone and a point for low light photos for the Pixel. That brings the overall score to 7.4 in the iPhone's favor. And that brings up our last category, kind of a bit of a cheat overall, but basically which camera out of these two phones do I actually prefer using? And to be honest here, I think I've got to give points to the Pixel 7. I think overwhelmingly this phone is punching way above its weight. I think even if we were comparing the phone directly to its like-for-like model, the iPhone 14, it would be punching kind of way above its weight, performing just as well as the iPhone 14. And I think for a couple of $100 less, that is extremely impressive. If you're interested in my overall thoughts about the iPhone 14 Pro and how it's performed as a photographer, check out this video here.